All right. Are we ready to go?
Yes.
Welcome to Equity Unlocked, the podcast where we explore how triple BEE, skills development, and transformation can be used as powerful tools for real economic impact rather than just compliance checkboxes. My name is Dumisho, and I'm joined by Khethiwe Nkuna, a transformation strategist and a CEO of Skills Quest. So today we'll be discussing the Employment Equity Amendment Act, the QCTO system, and technology and innovation. So, in your experience, how do you think the Employment Equity Act has introduced significant changes, and what do you think the key amendments are, and why do you think they're necessary?
So I think from an employment equity point of view, I think it's a really well-written legislation with an intent of ensuring that we are seeing transformation and representation in terms of African colored and Indian people, as well as women and people with disabilities. If I really look at this beyond compliance, it's really an opportunity to build organizations that are representative of the country that we live in. And if we also, again, reflect in terms of the last 20 years, we've seen very little progress, especially at the more senior levels. I like to refer to corporate South Africa as a cappuccino, so it's mostly brown at the bottom with a white layer and a few sprinkles of brown at the top.
What an analogy.
This cannot continue, because it is just unjust for us to have the black people, African colored and Indian, especially African, represented at the lower levels. So the legislation speaks to enabling and progressing people, and making sure that across all the levels there is representation.
Yeah.
And because of the lack of progress, I believe that that's why the Department of Labor has actually brought into effect the Amendment Act. So the major changes in the Amendment Act really speak to, one, I think, making sure that corporate South Africa is given a time limit to say you've got 5 years to meet a plan that you put together.
Okay.
And in this 5 years, year on year, when you report at the end of the calendar year and reporting season, you need to report back on your plan. And if you do not meet your own plan that you've put into place, you'll not get a certificate of compliance. The consequence of not getting a certificate of compliance then also means that you will not be able to do business with government. I think for me, this is a pull, and a push approach, because it's using scientific data, because the targets that are specific to sectors, that's the other major difference, where the targets are sector specific.
What does that mean?
So in the ICT space, for example, there's a information and communication technology sector target.
Oh, okay.
And over the 5 years, the ICT sector, and maybe let's use an example of a company, a technology company, needs to then meet those targets over the 5 years.
What would those targets look like for more clarity?
How the targets are set, it's based on the representation of the entire sector.
Okay.
And what the department has then done is just increase the number slightly to show that there is actually growth and progress. And the targets are across all the employment levels, so junior management, middle management, senior management. And overall, what it would look like is overall 70% of the total workforce being African, colored, and Indian.
Oh,
and the higher you go, the more specific the data is. So at a top management, which is usually the board and executive level of an organization, the 70% would be broken down according to African, colored, and Indian.
Oh, okay.
And the makeup is specifically in the ICT space. It's been informed by the reports that the companies have been reporting year on year to say, this is our makeup as company X, and this is the makeup of the industry. So it's not airy-fairy, but it's actual data that we know, because what we find is corporates continue to have the excuse that we can't find them. We can't find African women to hire at a senior level. But the data that they actually have in terms of the reports over the last couple of years tells us a different story.
Like data from like Stats South Africa, or like population
employment
data.
equity. So it's specifically employment equity, because every year companies report on employment equity.
Yeah.
It's a mandatory requirement.
Oh,
So
okay, I
that
see.
is the data that they've then used to inform the targets. That
Oh, okay, I
every
see, I
year
see, I see.
companies are reporting to say this is our makeup at senior management, at top management, at middle management. So at an industry level, there's then an average to say at top management, this is the representation. Maybe it's 40% or 10% African or 30% African women. And the target is then stretched by maybe an additional 6% so that we do actually see the progress. One of the other major changes is around the reinforcement in terms of compliance and effectively, ensuring that they're giving powers to employment equity inspectors
Oh, okay.
and increasing the number of employment equity inspectors as well, so that it's not just a theoretical assessment, but it's really to make sure that we are actually analyzing
And there's
and
a proper
looking.
evaluation.
Absolutely. And I think lastly, the last call out is really the importance overall, around representation,
Yeah.
making sure that we are seeing this progress within the industry.
So, from what you said that the consequences for non-compliance are becoming stricter. How can businesses better than, ensure that they meet these requirements that you've mentioned?
I think for me, it's really taking the spirit of the legislation and truly applying the Employment Equity Act. I often say that there's no loss to any organization. The more representative you are, whether it's ethnicity, gender, or people with disabilities, the better served you are to actually serve your clients. So that is the shift that needs to happen in corporate South Africa, where it's moving beyond a tick box approach to truly see the value of transformation or diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm of the opinion that for the bulk of these years, the reason we've not seen the relevant progress and value of transformation and employment equity is because the focus has been only on diversity and the difference, in terms of the women, but women, men, people with disabilities. But we've not started to tap into the part around equity and inclusion. And what I mean by that is if you hire a black female at an executive level, have you provided her the adequate support that she needs at an individual level? That's what equity is about.
What would that look like? Like more skills training?
Mentorship, coaching, and really ensuring that she lands adequately. And I think it's not only skills, right? Because for me, I believe that you've hired this individual because they've got value to add, right?
100%,
Because we are
100%.
also at risk of African talent or black people continuing to be seen to have perpetual potential.
Yeah.
Rather than, because it's almost saying we need to fix the individual rather than fix the system.
Yeah.
So the system needs to, and it's a focus around culture, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Building cultures that are inclusive, cultures that see value in individuals and enable individuals to flourish within the organization. Cultures where people don't feel that they need to cut parts of themselves out so that they fit and they are a specific fit for company X. So that's what I mean around equity and inclusion, because the ultimate combination of the two components of inclusion and equity is belonging. When people feel that they belong, they contribute, there's value, there's innovation, there's a lot of data around that, and that's how you then see companies that are diverse, companies that are representative, actually outperform companies that are not, from a revenue point of view. Yes, there is specific data around that. Just from a women point of view, companies that have senior females, of up to 30%, see an increase in revenue of up to 35% more than those that don't.
Just because the corporate space accepted them for who they are and, helped with the mentorship.
It's the diversity of thought, right? If I come in and I can contribute without fear, that my contributions are seen to be invaluable, I then would shy
away.
back. I wouldn't be contributing from a different point of view. That's why things like groupthink, where the more people are generic and the same, the more we have the same in terms of output. But
so it's like a group identity as opposed to like individual brilliance.
Contribution,
Yeah,
100%.
yeah. And I see that employment equity laws are now linked to government contracts. What can you tell me about that, and what does that say about like businesses looking to do business with the government?
Yeah, so I think with regards to the um, um, stricter measurements in terms of government, that is one of the measures that's been put in place. So if you don't get the certificate of compliance that I mentioned earlier on, you cannot then do business with government. And I think government and Department of Labor is really at a point where they're tired of excuses from corporate South Africa. It's really forcing corporate South Africa to make the relevant progress. And I'm certain that most companies do significant business with government, and gone are the times where people used to budget for fines, for example, if they're not complying with Employment Equity Act. Because
people used to budget to pay fines.
Yes.
Wow.
There are corporates that do, companies
wow.
that do that.
Okay, I see.
It's like, it's a small thing and we'll budget for it as a line item that is within the company cost.
Yeah.
But the cost now is far bigger, more significant. And I think it shows just the level of frustration as well in terms of the lack of progress in the country, in terms of reform at the levels and from a representation that we spoke about. We cannot continue to have the bulk of the people in terms of the country being underrepresented in corporate South Africa.
Would you not maybe say that reform was loading because South Africa is still relatively like a new democracy? So within that, wouldn't we have maybe needed a bit more time, or do you think that the laws being refined is something that's going to maybe accelerate that?
I think how long is a piece of string, right?
Yeah.
So 20 years, over 20 years for the little progress that we've seen, especially at the senior levels. And it's out of the intent, in my view.
Okay.
Regardless of the fact that we are a new democracy. It's our lack of intent from corporate South Africa. The intention to see transformation is not there.
Okay.
I often speak about the spirit where they say if we apply transformation in terms of the spirit rather than the latter in terms of the law, that's where you see value, where it's really saying things cannot continue to be like this.
I guess it kind of brings me back to like, compliance laws are getting stricter, so they're becoming more enforced, and you're saying that if we actually see value, then it'd be easier to comply. So how do you balance that narrative and saying like, okay, we have to do this, but how do we see the spirit in, as opposed to like, because we have to, like it's something that's mandatory?
So I think it's the difference between a stick approach and the willingness. The bulk of South Africa has shown that they are not willing to show the progress and transformation. And that's why then the government is coming with the stick approach to say, we've not seen this progress, and for as long as things continue like this, we will just have to then conform and force corporates to do the same. And I'm not saying that all corporates are not showing the progress. And I think perhaps that point around, the willingness, those that are actually willing and have shown progress should actually be highlighted, right? As examples of how, 100%, of how if you truly do apply the intent of transformation, you do actually see the value.
Tell me about the QCTO framework and the SETA system and what the differences between those are and why SETA is being replaced.
So I think if we look back in terms of the SETA systems, a lot of it throughout the years has been producing graduates and people that are actually not relevant for industry and not relevant for specific sectors, and that actually even result in tangible outcomes.
Okay.
I'll give an example of learnerships. I speak passionately about the fact that it actually angers me around the fact that young people in South Africa hop from one learnership to the other. And that speaks to, one, I think just the relevance of what they are studying, and what they're studying not being relevant for corporate South Africa. If you look at the SETAs, for example, and the list of critical skills that are listed in SETA, let's use Mix SETA, for example. The list of critical skills that are listed there, the list is 4 years outdated.
It's outdated.
It's not
yeah.
speaking to the current requirements.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
and what's exciting about QCTO is it's actually aligning more specifically to industries and having qualifications that are 70% related to actual practical experience, you know, and practical relevance within specific industries. So it's exciting because it really presents an opportunity to reform and completely transform the learning space and have qualifications that speak to the demands that are in real time, you know. And I'll give an example. Let's use, for example, a renewable energy company,
Yeah.
you know, where previously they would have had very generic, you know, training in the CETA space. But if you then align to the QCTO, the course that maybe someone would be doing around renewable energy installation would be 70% practical work that they would be doing, and then 30% is then the theoretical.
Okay.
It provides an opportunity for practical application as well. Some of the other exciting elements is having shorter courses, you know, a complete course being 40 units, where it would have taken much longer previously, you know. So the 40 units, you can add direct value to a company and overlay that with specific requirements around a specific sector or industry. So I think it provides an opportunity for us to really move with speed with regards to redressing some of the skills gaps,
Yeah.
you know,
yeah.
and speak to practical experience and practical demand in terms of skilling from an organization's point
Like
of view.
more specified skill, is that what you're saying?
100%.
But doesn't that, if you have more of a specified skill, doesn't that sort of like create like an inhibitor for career growth in if that specified skill that you have becomes outdated?
So I think the other important thing is lifelong learning, right?
Oh, okay,
So
yes.
it's continuous learning rather than
Oh, okay.
stagnant.
Oh, okay. I
Rather
like
than
that. I like
stagnant
that. Yeah, yeah.
learning. I think that's one of the things, if you look globally, the trends, it's no longer just around a person getting one qualification and that's it, and you're going to do that for the rest of your life.
Oh, okay.
You know, it's
Yeah.
really using a base. There's a base skill, but lifelong learning is encouraged because industries are moving so much faster.
Definitely,
You know, if
definitely.
we look at, for example, the introduction of artificial intelligence, the
Yes, yes,
introduction
yes,
of
yes.
technology, some of the roles that are going to be done in 4 years' time don't even exist
They're
yet.
going to become outdated.
Absolutely. You know, so that's why the importance of, you know, micro credentialing and short courses that speak to what's in demand, but continuously then
There's this
making sure
continuous
that you,
adaptation. So how do you think the advent of like AI and you know these AI learning systems and digital transformation can contribute to that?
I think it provides an exciting opportunity
Yeah.
to democratize access to quality education. So platforms like THOOTO, for example,
Yeah,
I think are exciting platforms that really provide an opportunity for quality education that is accessible to young people and people in general, that speak to industry demands. And the overlay of artificial intelligence as well provides an opportunity that we can deliver quality at a much quicker rate, right, in terms of the quality of the content that is actually being developed from a training point of view. Even from what I passionately speak about, I think, which is what I spoke about at the beginning, the fact that the quality in terms of the programs that are out there, it's substandard quality, the traditional types of programs, you know, and through the technology point of view, what also is presented is an exciting opportunity around scale. You know, you can quickly close out gap, and I think that's why I spoke about democratizing, you know, access to quality education. It's not relevant only in the skills development and in the learnership space and skills programs. That technology, you know, can actually be even applied from a basic education point of view. So I think it's exciting times for us, you know, and it's exciting to see THOOTO being at the forefront of this, bringing this cutting edge innovation that embeds the artificial intelligence, you know, because it is a real game changer.
So in that case, how would you curb the incident of like a digital divide? Like if someone doesn't necessarily have access to a laptop and access to internet, internet, and you know we're moving so fast, and there are people who are still in 2016 reading newspapers. You know, how do we sort of like strike that balance and like not leaving people behind? Like, would there need to be like a system of like, you know, maybe going to villages and like building libraries, giving out laptops, you know, building better like Wi-Fi infrastructure just to like, you know, curb that? Because from my point of view, if that is the case, in uh, you know, digital transformation, you know, some villages still have never seen like a laptop, let alone running water. So how do we curb that?
I think again it speaks to the spirit over form, and even from a transformation point of view. So it's about collaboration, right?
Yeah.
And companies, with the magnitude of the challenges that we have, I often say that there's no one organization that can solve the scale of the problems that we have.
Yes,
I
yes,
believe in
yes.
a collective impact framework, right?
Okay.
So if we're speaking about, connectivity, for example, how do the telecoms companies play a role in closing those gaps for connectivity in rural areas?
Yeah.
If we're talking about accessibility, and it can be directly linked to the BEE scorecard, right? Because
Oh,
from a
yeah,
socio-economic
yeah,
development point of view,
yeah, yeah.
that is the mandate, right? And that's why, even from a transformation and BEE point of view, there are sector-specific targets, and sector-specific scorecards. And those sector-specific scorecards are saying contribute to the transformation and improvement and development of sectors leveraging your specific sector.
Yes.
So as a technology company, then how do you leverage your know-how to truly create the change? Is it the connectivity? Is it desktops? Is it infrastructure? So for me, it's really around a collective. And I'll give you an example of work that I did a couple of years ago. So in 2015, we implemented a project in rural KwaZulu-Natal.
Okay.
So this community is an off-grid community that there's no access to electricity and no connectivity. We put in a 50 kilowatt microgrid in that community. We put in a digital innovation center in that community. And the 50 kilowatt microgrid goes into powering the irrigation system. It's an agricultural cooperative, as well as the digital innovation center. And the basic start of training for those young people in that community was end-user computer training, followed by entrepreneurship. And then there's training that speaks to specific demands within different industries that are in that local community: agriculture, hospitality, and the likes.
So South Africa has seen a growing number of black-owned tech startups, but access to funding is just, you know, like a bit difficult. So how do you think corporates can use their enterprise and supplier development spend to support black-owned businesses in, you know, the rapidly changing digital economy?
I think you're highlighting such an important point, and I think it takes us back, right, to the sector-specific BEE codes. So companies that are in the technology space should really harness and invest and be invested in growing and developing those startups that are in the tech space, because a lot of it, as you mentioned, is also, besides access to funding, it's also access to market. So how do you use and leverage those small businesses as part of your ecosystem? So large corporates, usually I think the challenges that we would have around adequately moving with speed with regards to innovation and technology would be rigidity from a corporate point of view. But how can you think differently around leveraging the enterprise and supplier development beneficiaries as an extension of the organization? How do you go to market with those small businesses to differentiate yourself? For example, if there is a government contract that you're bidding for, where you actually bid together with the small business, and you then outsource a percentage of that work to that startup. What that then does is, one, it's access to market, and it's also then growth from a revenue point of view. But it's going beyond just a tick box where it's like, asking for a wish list from a startup to say, what can we buy for you, desks or, laptops or the likes. But the biggest challenge for small businesses is access to market. So companies need to think very differently about leveraging the value and the flexibility that is in these startups, and integrating them, as I mentioned, into their value chains. If we talk about access to funding, for example, how do you leverage progressing them from enterprise development to then graduating them into your supply chain, and they then are supplier development.
So would the startup be like a subsidiary of like the bigger conglomerate?
It's not necessarily a subsidy, and I think that's why I said extension.
But I would imagine that,
it's really leveraging them and their flexibility.
Okay.
And bringing the ESD program beyond just the tick box approach, but truly partnering. It's partnering. It's not a subsidiary. It's partnering, because that is how the legislation is built, right? It's enterprise and supplier development. The start of it would be to say, we are developing and growing this enterprise and we are investing in it. It could be that you are investing in it maybe through access to mentorship, access to clients. Maybe you are developing them and developing the small business owner, for example, and they have access to, training and the likes. That's usually ideal for organizations that are probably just starting up, But small businesses do not live on and grow on coaching alone.
Yeah, they need more intention.
How you then grow them is you integrate them into your supply chain. How you integrate them into your supply chain is you procure from them so that they then in turn grow. That is what access to market is, and the legislation, as I was mentioning, is really beautifully written. And corporate South Africa really just need to apply the law in its true spirit, because why those businesses and small businesses start is to be in business.
True.
And the only way that they can grow is through access to market. Beyond coaching, because they're not going to grow. You can coach an organization and a small business, until the cows come home. But ultimately, where you really do start to see the growth is when
you feed into them,
when they are growing. And it could be us, we integrate them into our supply chain, we buy from them. But the model that I spoke about is a different approach, right? To say, let's go to market together. And we will outsource 30% of the work to you. Because what that then does is you are still there as well as a business, to be able to oversee and de-risk any elements that could be at risk because it's a small business. But you are then providing them the opportunity for them to grow, because their balance sheet is then growing. They are invoicing and they are growing.
But I get that. How do you then, because obviously there's a hierarchy, right? So how do you then evade the consequence of, these startups being taken advantage of?
Again, it's a spirit, right? It's to make sure that you are growing and the intention and the value that is seen.
Okay.
Rather than a tick box.
Opportunistic.
Because if your intention is, through my enterprise and supplier development, I want to develop and contribute to the transformation of my industry, if it's ICT, by growing other small businesses. Because those small businesses then in turn hire local unemployed people. That's how we contribute to the economic growth.
Yeah, definitely. And, from everything that you've been saying, I realize that you're quite passionate on transformation and how it can contribute to the economic growth. So let's sort of think about a system of like economic growth basically overlapping with AI. How do you think we could use AI to sort of like, track economic growth and, employment equity, compliance? How do you think that would look like?
I think AI, or broadly technology, so what that does is it enables, it removes repetitive and manual processes, and companies can then focus on the substance, which is the quality output of programs. By leveraging technology and synchronizing reporting and having processes where you automate the reporting, you automate compliance. you then are not focusing the bulk of your time on admin-intensive activities, but rather focusing on the quality of programs and the substance of programs that I spoke about.
Yeah. Just to close off, transformation is something that's no longer optional, but like from your view, it's something that's imperative, right? So how should companies rethink their triple BE strategies to align with these new, employment equity laws and the QCTO framework?
I think for me, I'll anchor it again around intention. People need to move beyond a tick box approach, but
Make the transformation more meaningful.
Absolutely, more meaningful and sustainable. Implement programs that are sustainable. The value that we see when companies truly do put in place, meaningful programs and not just chasing BEE points. I think that's the starting point where the aim is not, and the focus is not about BEE points. The focus is about quality output and quality programs that result in tangible value in changing people's lives.
Yes.
And the direct output would then be the BEE points.
Yeah.
But the
So
main
you're saying
aim
it should be
shouldn't
secondary?
be, yes.
Okay.
The main aim shouldn't be BEE.
Okay.
BEE is a legislation that enables transformative change in our country.
100%. I think approaching it from a secondary perspective, like within a capitalistic society, whereas these monopolies are primarily like profit driven. How do you then incentivize these big corporates to become intentional? Like, as aside from getting their triple BE points, because I'd imagine like their focus is their triple BE points.
I think for me, it goes back to the point I made earlier on around there is no loss to transformation and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because there is a direct correlation, as I spoke about, in terms of organizations that prioritize diversity prioritize, and in South African context, of course, it's the transformation, do actually show higher levels of profit margins. They show higher levels of innovation.
You did just say that there
so
is
for as long as we only see it as a cost rather than a value and an investment into the growth of the organization from a sustainable point of view, because the more diverse organizations are, the better they are to serve their clients. I often make an example of, we all know the case a couple of years ago where there was an advert in the newspapers around textured hair, and the advert was saying that Afro hair was damaged compared to straight hair, which is Caucasian hair, and
I remember that one,
if there was a person of color in that room, that mistake would have never happened.
Because I can imagine.
Because they would have, because that person would have said, but I disagree. So it's a costly expense, to the organization compared to the value that they could have actually had if it was a more representative organization. So there are direct costs to ignoring transformation and ignoring diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that cost is not being adequately representative to clients. The more diverse we are, we can serve a wider range of clients. Even if we zone in terms of employment equity, if we zone into people with disabilities, for example, there's over 1 billion people globally with disabilities.
Yes.
And that is an addressable market. And those people are actually procuring, and buying. They are buyers, they are customers. Organization. Exactly. So if in the organization we have people with disabilities that are employed, they know how to appeal to people with disabilities from a market point of view. So in essence, I think just in summary, it's really just to move beyond just
the tick box,
but see the true value. And it's a shift, and it's a mindset shift.
Yeah, perspective shift, definitely.
And certainly will take time.
Definitely. But, we do have the Amendment Act coming through. Thank you so much for your time. This has been very insightful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.